Hey guys, welcome back to Kalei Plants. It's me again, Mark, and today we're back at the greenhouse. And for this video, I wanted to share with you some of the best and the worst plants that I bought this year. So these are very recent plants. Most of them I think I bought about in the middle of the summer or maybe earlier this summer, so they are very new plants. So I would just like to share with you some of my experiences with them. I've had a lot of success with some of them, and with others I've had very difficult times with them. Some of them gave me some stress and some of them really made me happy. So I wanted to show you what those types are. Maybe, and I hope that this list will give you an idea on what plants are much easier to care for, and maybe inspire you to buy new succulents as well, to try out very different and very new varieties. So I think we're gonna start with my top one performer, my best plant of all, and I would say that this is, I think, my proudest purchase of this year. This is a variegated decora, and it is one with green and whitish variegation. It doesn't have yellow variegation, but I believe that this was propagated from a decora that had a lot more variegation. So this one is a little bit more on the white and the green color, and it's really beautiful. It's really striking. If you look at the leaves, look at that. It's been very consistent with its growth with me. So it's been growing a lot, putting a lot of growth. Actually, there are more leaves right now than when I first got it. So it's a very beautiful plant, and I haven't had any stresses with this. You know, I told you before that I've had a mistake with the potting mix because I added coco peat, but this one is planted in coco peat and I don't see any problems with it. It's just growing consistently. So also, you would know when it's thirsty, when the leaves are a bit wrinkled, they're not full and they're flappy. So that's how I describe my thirsty leaves. They're flappy, and this one really tells me when it's thirsty. I don't have to guess if it's thirsty because I would know when I touch its leaves. If it's soft already, then it will need water. So I think it's a very good succulent. It doesn't confuse me a lot. It didn't give me any stress. It just kept on growing, and it really liked the situation that I gave it here in the greenhouse. So I would really recommend, if you want a big succulent, a variegated decora. So it might not be a compact Echeveria at first, but as it grows, it will just produce much more tighter rosette. It will get more leaves in the middle, so it will grow into a much tighter rosette. So I would really recommend this plant. And also, I've had successes with gibiflora before, and I believe that this is an Echeveria gibiflora. You can see that my big gibiflora is there, still standing, and I'm hoping that this one will grow to be as big as that. Also, there are other variegated Echeveria gibifloras out there that I would really want to try now because I've had success with this. So there is that Japan Moon River. So if you're looking at sellers online in Benguet, they are selling Echeveria Japan Moon River with varying different shades of variegation. So some of them doesn't have that good of a variegation. I'm actually looking forward to buy a plant with more variegation, because we all know, if you didn't know, you should know that variegation is not consistent. It's not stable. Some plants will produce less variegation over time, and some plants will produce more. It's a very unstable thing, the variegation on plants. So I wouldn't rely on a plant with less variegation because it might not produce any more variegation soon. So I'm looking to buy Japan Moon River that has a lot of variegation, and know that it will be a lot more expensive, but hopefully soon it will not be that expensive at all. I think this plant, when it first got introduced to the market, it was very expensive, but it became much more easily available. The price got cheaper, which is why I bought one. I think I bought this for less than 500 pesos. So it's a very cheap plant right now, and it's really beautiful. And if you want to practice with variegated succulents, I would recommend Echeveria Variegated decora. Okay, now for our worst succulent, I think I'm gonna be alternating best, worst, best, worst. So I think the worst, ultimately the worst of all, and this is the Sedum clavatum. Now, we all know there's a lot of Sedum clavatums out there that are much more beautiful than this. This is not the best clavatum, not the best example, because I didn't have very good experience with this plant. It came in shipping with a lot less leaves than what it was posted. than when it was posted. So a lot of the leaves just dropped in shipping, so I would not expect any other Sedum clavatum coming here as a whole plant, because I believe that the plant itself will really drop their leaves. So now it managed to retain some of the rosettes it has, so I'm still hoping that it can grow beautifully, but also it root a lot more slowly than my other succulents. So it's very slow rooting, especially in the middle of the summer, probably because of the heat, so it's not rooting a lot. I actually replaced the potting mix on this one, and what I saw is just a few root hairs on it, so it didn't root a lot. Actually, I have another plant here which rooted a lot. This is still a thirsty Graptopetalum Ellen. This one had a ton of roots on it when I uprooted it, but they're planted at about the same time. So I would really say that sedums are much more slower rooting compared to our Graptopetalums. But I believe that sedums, when they get established, they are also very prolific growers. So I'm hoping that once I get this established, maybe now that we're coming into much more cooler months, maybe it will produce a lot more growth than what it looks like right now, because it's not looking very pretty at all. Actually, I'm not bothering with this plant anymore because it really looks ugly for me. Yeah, it still has that smell, but it's not very impressive for me right now. I think I could manage to grow that a lot more, or maybe I will buy a bigger Sedum clavatum later on this year if I manage to get the cash for it also. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to our next best succulent. Now this is, I think, I would say another underrated Echeveria. You know, I recently made a video about underrated Echeverias. I will share a link maybe at the screen. And this is one that I would say is also another underrated Echeveria. This is Echeveria Runyonii. So this is probably called Lucita. Some other sellers, they call it white rose. So you can see here, it's got that round, really round shape that looks like a rose, looks very beautiful. The leaves are rounded, so what I would say, the leaves look like they go up like this and then they round off like that. So they kind of look like the Echeveria imbricata, but it doesn't. We all know Echeveria imbricata has that cup-shaped leaves, so it does have that cup shape, but it's a little bit thicker on the upside of the leaves. So that's really interesting. It actually resembles Lola, just for a little bit, maybe at a glance from a distance. So it might resemble a Lola, but it's far different from a Lola. And I think Lolas don't produce these wide rosettes. I think this one will produce a much wider head compared to Lolas, which grow upward like a stack like that. So it's a very different plant. It grows differently. It also has a very different coloring. But I would say this is also an interesting plant because this is the non-mutated form of Echeveria topsy-turvy. So if you've seen topsy-turvy, this is the same plant. The topsy-turvy is just a mutated form, and this is the non-mutated form. Also, because since this is Runyonii, is related to the topsy-turvy, it will only produce a lot of babies underneath once it grows. So it's a clumping type succulent. It produces a lot of offsets readily, so you will not have to bother with it propagating it via leaf. Actually, there are already babies here. Oh yes, it's a very prolific succulent, so it's also very underrated. I don't see a lot of people sharing this plant, but it's very interesting for me, and it's a top performer. I think I didn't have any problems with it. The leaves, even if they're in full sun, they don't rot, they don't burn, so because of the thick farina, and also it can tolerate a little bit more watering because the leaves are still thin enough, they're not plump, so I don't have any problems with this rotting. It's just rooting slowly because I have it in a big pot. Okay, now for the next not so impressive worst succulent, I would say the Sedum lucidum obesum. Now this is what remains of my Sedum lucidum. Another leaf just dropped again. So it's smelling really good right now. Actually, I've had several problems with this. I think it got shrinkled. I think I neglected it because the leaves are firm, but the soil is dry and it's dropping leaves. So I don't know why, because the soil is dry and it's dropping leaves. Because usually if the leaves are dropping, it's because it's overwatered. But I think maybe it's dropping because it needs a lot more sun. So I moved it in a sunnier spot here at the greenhouse, and I'm hoping that it will no longer drop leaves. I'm just holding back my watering on this one. This is a really challenging plant. This is a very plump, very thick leaf sedum, and I know that thick leaf succulents will have much more troubles adjusting, especially if you're not yet used to thick leaf succulents. They can drop leaves very quickly, and also they can get rot very quickly. So you will have to be mindful if you're buying Sedum, lucidum. You have to be extra careful for that. I think also maybe because I'm seeing a pattern right now that my sedums are not all looking very beautiful. So maybe because I bought them in the middle of summer. I know I shouldn't have done that. I should have bought sedums maybe when the months are cooler. So now I will just have to wait for the colder months to come in, and maybe they will produce more growth soon. So yeah, that's another lesson for me this season. Okay, now we're gonna go with our next top succulent, best succulent. This is Graptoveria by Nassy. Okay, so I was first acquainted with the Graptoveria by Nassy through Mom Dorothy's channel. If you haven't seen her channel already, it's Life, Love, and Succulents on YouTube. And she shared a video of her Graptoveria by Nassy, and I just was really impressed with that plant because I've had some experience with Graptoveria Harry Watson, Fred Ives, and I wanted to see other types of Graptoverias because I find them very easy and they're fast growers. And I would say that this is one that is very impressive to me as it grows, because I didn't have a lot of problems with it. It had problems in shipping at first. I think it had a leaf that is rotting, that is mushy when it came in shipping. But now, since it's more established, it just kept on producing growth, and the leaves got much more thicker, which is, I find that's very beautiful, very interesting. And the rosette is much more compact compared to the Harry Watson, so it's not a very loose rosette shape. It's more compact. It actually resembles an Echeveria right now, but it's actually a Graptoveria by Nassy. So would really recommend you try this plant if you manage to find Graptoverias with your sellers, and if you manage to find a Graptoveria by Nassy being sold. You just have to buy maybe a bigger specimen. Don't buy a plant that has very few leaves on it, because the leaves can drop while in shipping. If you can find a medium size to large size by Nassy, I would really recommend it. If it comes to you through shipping, you will not have any problems with acclimating it. It can root very quickly as well. And once you see that the leaves are plumping back up again, you will see that it's very interesting. It's got these nice margins on the edges of its leaves once it's growing. So it's really beautiful, it's really pretty, and also it's very resilient. I didn't have any other problems with this. Okay, so now we're gonna go to our next not best succulent, next worst succulent. This is our Echeveria Perle von Nurnberg. So now I've had Perle von Nurnberg before, and I really had problems with it, and now I'm having problems on my Perle von Nurnberg again. So this is not the easiest plant to care for in the Philippines. What I would say is the problem of this plant is that it's rooting very slowly. It's a very slow rooter. I've had it planted for several weeks and it didn't produce any roots. It didn't attach properly to its soil. I actually had to replace the potting mix of this plant because I wanted to see if it can root properly in a mix that has alnus compost in it. So now I think it's attaching itself. Back then, when I was still rooting it, it was just like always falling down on its spots. So I know that it's not rooting correctly, so I had to repot it, and now the leaves are still thirsty, but I recently watered it and I don't think I can water it anytime soon. So now, just so that it doesn't dry up in the sun, I'm not giving it a lot of sun, which is why it's growing a lot more slower. Now if you have been following my plant purchases, you would know that I purchased this about the same time that I bought these other plants, and you can see that the development of this one is really lagging behind. It's really not developing as quickly as my other succulents, as my other Echeveria, which is why it made the worst list. So it's not the very best plant to grow, but I believe when I manage to grow this big, so if I manage to grow it a lot, it will only produce these very beautiful purplish pinkish leaves with these really light stunning edges. So if you want a very beautiful succulent that can be a little bit challenging, you can try maybe the Perle von Nurnberg. Now a lot of sellers will actually sell Perle von Nurnbergs with less leaves, so they will not be selling it with a lot of leaves, which can be a problem. Because if the plant doesn't have a lot of leaves, then it will not root very quickly, and also it can lose those leaves before it establishes itself. So I would recommend, if you're buying Perle von Nurnberg, buy it when the temperatures are not too hot and when you already mastered your potting mix, and also if the plant is not that small. If the plant is big enough, then maybe you can try, maybe you will have more success with it. This one, I actually got it as a medium to small size plant, so I would buy a bigger one if I had the chance to buy Perle von Nurnberg again. Perle von Nurnberg. Okay, now we're gonna go to our next best succulent. I think this is one that's growing on me. It's actually a pretty new variety here at the local and here in the Philippines, and you can see that this one had a lot of development already. I would say that this was smaller when I first got it, but now you can see that it's already covering the pot. So I think there's some space at the sides of the pot when I first planted it, but it's grown a lot since. So this is a Graptoveria Bridget. This is another variety of Graptoveria. We have had that Graptoveria By Nassy recently, and now this is a Graptoveria Bridget. It's a very different Graptoveria. It actually resembles Echeveria apus. That's what it looks like to me, but the seller said that it's Bridget, and if you look at it online, you would find that this plant will have even more thicker leaves than this one. This is still not thick enough, so I'm still waiting for it to establish so that it can produce thicker leaves. And yeah, so far I haven't had any issues with this. It's been very impressive. I think I've been very impressed with this plant, with its growth. It's been growing consistently. It didn't have any issues with burning. It didn't have issues with rotting. It's got some dried leaves at the bottom because it's still rooting. But yeah, it's really stunning. It's really beautiful. Graptoveria Bridget, and I think it's got some pinkish purplish tones as well. So I think it's really stunning, and it's got some thick farina as well. So if you're looking for a compact shaped Graptoveria that can be easy to grow, I would recommend this. Yes, apus, Echeveria apus, I've had problems with that before. Yeah, you can see here. Okay, they kinda look like each other, right? So this is the apus and this is the Bridget. So they kind of resemble each other, but the apus I've tried this plant. It's a very slow developer. It doesn't produce a lot of growth very quickly compared to our Graptopetalums. Okay, this is not a propagation. This used to be a big plant. Okay, so now if you're looking for something easier than Echeveria apus or Echeveria Hercules, if you've had troubles with those types of plants with Orion, then I would recommend you try Graptoveria Bridget. It has the same look, it has much more plumper leaves, and it's much easier to care for. Okay, now we're going to our next not best succulent. This is the Sedum allantoides. So I believe it's put on some growth. I think it looks much more bigger than it used to, but it's a very slow rooter. It didn't root very quickly, and it's not attaching itself to the soil. I recently watered this about last night. Okay, I think I watered this last night, and what I found out is that it's still not attached to its soil. It's just laying on top of the soil, and the roots are just right around the stem, right around the bottom part of the stem, so it's not rooting very deeply enough yet. So I think that because it's too hot for it to be establishing itself. Yeah, but you don't usually find this plant being sold right now. It's a pretty uncommon thing to find on online sellers, but I really liked Sedum allantoides, which is why I bought this, because this is one that is not a hybrid. This is a species of Sedum. So if you're gonna look for Sedums in the wild, they would look more like this compared to Sedum jelly bean or Sedum pork and beans. So it would look more like a Sedum allantoides. So this plant is actually in the wild. It produces a lot of food for pollinators in its area, because when it blooms, a lot of pollinators, hummingbirds and bees, go to this plant because of its blooms. I think there's a specific butterfly that only thrives with the flowers of Sedum allantoides. So that's what I researched with this plant. I believe an insect really depends on this plant in the wild. So I think that it's a very interesting succulent, but really it's not rooting very quickly, and it hasn't put on a lot of growth, but I expect it to grow much more taller. If you're looking to buy this plant, I would recommend you buy this in cooler months when when it's not too hot. But you can maybe buy it if you're growing indoors under grow lights, because when the temperatures are regulated, they can be more stable. They can root much properly and much quickly if it's not too hot. So yeah, I would really not recommend that if it's in the middle of the summer and you're gonna buy sedums. Okay, our next and last best plant, and I really didn't expect to add this to the list. I was actually expecting this plant to be worse than my experience with it, but it's been performing very nicely. It's been growing consistently in my care. This is a Pachyphytum oviparum. I think a lot of people doesn't like to buy this plant right away because the leaves are so thick. They might think that they will kill it, but so far I haven't had any issues with it. Maybe because I planted it in a clay pot, so maybe you will find more success with this plant if you grow it in a clay pot. And you can see here that it just roots very nicely. So it's produced a lot of air roots right there. So I believe that it's rooting into the soil right now. Okay, so I think it's gonna reach the edge of the pot as well. So it's been very consistent, and when I'm not watering this plant, it just shrivels, it just produces wrinkling on its leaves, but it's not dropping any leaves, and I haven't had issues with this overwatering. So maybe because I planted it in a clay pot. You can see here it's a very stunning, very beautiful Pachyphytum. It's really thick. It's fatter than our Pachyphytum billbaker, which is much more common here in the Philippines. So I would really recommend, if you can manage to get your hands on Pachyphytum oviparum, just try it and you will know that it's a very resilient plant. It needs to be watered, I think, when the leaves are wrinkled, so that's how you can tell if it needs watering. But other than that, it can pretty much tolerate neglect. You can pretty much leave it in sun, in filtered sun, morning sun, filtered sun, and it will not have any issues with you. Just as long as maybe if you plant it in a clay pot, you will have more success with it. Because I haven't tried it in a plastic pot, but I think if you plant it in a plastic pot, then you will have to water less. Okay, so that's what I would say with the Pachyphytum. I actually had another thick leaf succulent, the Graptopetalum amethystinum right here, but I recently had problems with it burning. So maybe because I put it into the sun too quickly, I placed it in full sun too quickly. So you can see here, this is not a great update. So it's got burns right there. Okay, and it's got a burn on the stem. I think that's a burn because it's not growing, so I don't think it's a rot, but the leaves on that side just dropped. Okay, but you can see that the tips are still beautiful. Okay, so I would say that it's still growing, and I think I'm just gonna wait for it to mature and produce new leaves so that it will look beautiful again. I will not be putting it in full direct sun anytime though, because this used to be right by this plant, so they used to be planted at the same spot, but now it got burned, and this one didn't get any burn. So I would really recommend this plant right now over this. But this one, I would say, is a faster grower, and it's a faster grower. It's just not, the leaves are not that thick enough compared to the oviparum. So the leaves are much more, I would say, smaller. Though they are thick, it's much smaller than the leaves of the oviparum. Okay, I think I'm gonna buy more of those amethystinum and oviparum soon. They're really growing on me, these thick leaf succulents. I really like them. I really adore them right now. So maybe I will buy more soon, and I will share with you some more of my experiences with them. Now we're gonna go with our last worst succulent, and this is a very interesting one. This is a Echeveria Swan Lake. So it's a hybrid of Echeveria Runyonii and probably a Shavayana. It's a very interesting plant. Actually, I just posted this I think a few weeks back, and it had a lot of questions. A lot of people asked me about this plant. What is that plant? It's very beautiful. It's very interesting. Yes, it is. It is a Swan Lake. It's a Runyonii hybrid. So you can see that the leaves are upturned a little bit, just like our Runyonii, like our topsy-turvy. So it's very interesting, and it's got that bluish color. And also, I know that this plant will grow only bigger when it matures, but now what I found out is that it's a very slow rooter, so it's not rooting very quickly. You would know, I had this right about the same time that I got this plant, so I think They're both at, I bought them both at the same time, but this one is already producing a lot of central growth. This one, not so much. Okay, so now I'm being very patient with it. So I think you will need to be a little more patient if you're buying Echeveria Swan Lake. But I would say that if you can manage to establish it well and grow it, then it can be very interesting, very pretty. It's got this pinkish color on the older leaves and this bluish cool tone in its new growth with whitish farina and these light margins and these wavy edges and this upturned shape. So it's a lot of interest for a small plant. It's very beautiful. So also I would recommend you try this plant, but maybe if you mastered your potting mix already, because I think that it's slow rooting. So you would know that I bought this at right about the same time, so they're not developing at the same rate. Some are developing much more slower, which is why they made the worst list, and some are much more easy to care for. I didn't have to stress myself with these other good type succulents, but with these other types I had to put extra effort so I don't kill them. I've also killed one plant. Actually, a head is still alive from that plant, but I've killed the rest of the plant. So this is the what remains of the Hagaitulimanensis. So I've said this several times before. I think this is the only plant that is in the worst shape in my recent purchases. This is the worst one yet, and this is still alive. I'm hoping it still has a root right there, so I'm hoping that it can still grow. And also, even though it died, a lot of the leaves it had actually propagated. So this is one leaf of that Hagaitulimanensis, and it already has a lot of babies on it. Okay, so that's one good thing about that plant. Okay, so you have to be extra careful if you're buying these slightly bad type succulents, especially in the middle of the summer. Maybe you can try buying them when it's not too hot. And I wouldn't say that I stopped buying succulents. I still have more succulents coming in. You might notice. Okay, this is what is still in my greenhouse. I still have a lot of space to put plants in, especially since I gave some of my plants away recently, because I think I want to give myself some more time with my other succulents, because most of those plants that I gave away, they're actually duplicates of my other plants here. And yeah, I wanted to share some of them, so which is why I gave them away, which is why now I'm looking for more plants to fill my greenhouse with. So you can expect that we will still be having more unboxings here in the channel. We will still have new plants to introduce to you guys. So if you don't want to miss that, please make sure to subscribe down below. Also, if you have tips on the ones that are more challenging for me, if you already managed to grow some of these harder varieties and if you've had success with them, please make sure to share it down at the comments below. I would really much appreciate your contributions to this channel, and maybe we can share it with other beginners as well. And if you have any other questions, just comment down below. Also, if you like these plants, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up below. It really inspires us here in the channel, and it really helps us grow the channel, the Kalei Plants channel. So I think that's about it for this video, guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.